Good to see you all this morning. A couple quick announcements before we get started. First of all, tonight we are having a movie night at 6 p.m. in our multi-purpose room. We were going to have it in the chapel. We moved it down to be a little bit more cozy in the space where we do open tables. So if you're able to come join us at 6 p.m., we'd love to have you. We will have pizza and popcorn, salad, gluten-free, vegan. We're trying to make sure all the dietary restrictions are covered so that you can be there with us. And we'll be watching the movie Rustin. It will have some mature themes. There will be a talk of, civil rights time and his battle as he works through that time. So come ready for some thoughtful themes, some important historical moments we'll be discussing afterwards, kind of our reaction to the film. But we'd love to have you join us. Throw on some sweats, it's casual, bring a blanket, and be with us at 6 o'clock in the multipurpose room. Second of all, I'd like to wish us all a happy mid-year anniversary. We've made it. Congratulations. Many of you have found resilience and creativity and problem solving to get through some things in the first half of this year that you did not think you would have to face. And so I applaud you for that. I'm proud of us. We've made it here. That was 2026 side A. But my prayer for us as we step into 2026 side B, yes, that's a cassette tape reference, is that remembering God's mercies through these hard times, how he's helped us with friends and family and strangers, that we'll make it through whatever comes in these next 6 months. And hopefully this community can be a resource for you to reach out so that we can share each other's joys and each other's burdens, the good, the bad, and the ugly. That's what church community is for. So we hope to continue to support you through the second half of 2026. But that's not my sermon. That's just a preamble. So please join me as we bow our heads and get started today. Lord, on this Sabbath morning, we do not take it for granted all the sacrifices made by everyone to be here today. The intentionality, the time, and the emotional presence that each person has brought into this room. These are gifts, and we receive them as such. And yet, may we remember that what we have gathered to experience is not merely a sermon, nor even the gift of beautiful music, but the chance to be one community together, participating in the presence of your Spirit. As my colleague Tyler Craft once said, may the act of ceasing and gathering and resting in community be in itself a form of proclamation. Open our hearts, Lord, to whatever you have to say to us, and thank you in advance for how you will move among us today. In your name I pray. Amen. It was 2009. I had signed up for Adventist College of the Broad, which is a program where your American Adventist university sends you to an Adventist university overseas. And I would be spending 6 weeks in France, attempting to put into practice the French that I had learned over the last year in school. I eagerly packed my bags and I headed off with lots of prayers and counsel from my parents, who were very worried but sent me anyways. And I spent 6 wonderful weeks enjoying French food and endless grammar workbooks and beautiful scenery, entirely too much cheese, and more than a few French people who politely but quite firmly requested that we just speak English anyways. Still, I learned a lot. It was a wonderful experience, and at the end of the program, I even had a few weeks where I was allowed to travel before coming back to the United States. The only thing was that by then, of course, my student budget had been kind of depleted, which obviously left me with one last option, couchsurfing.com. This was the pre-Airbnb era where basically generous hosts would open their homes to travelers for free, provided everyone had good travel reviews. And it also didn't hurt to bring a little gift with you from your travels. So you would bring someone with a honey or a cheese or flowers from your travels as kind of a thank you for their generosity. I stayed with wonderful women and families in Geneva and Paris and Barcelona, and I learned a lot from the locals who lived there. But then I got to Rome. I noticed on my host profile that she spoke only Italian and French, but she was the best option available. Besides, I reasoned, by now I can mostly understand French, and Spanish is basically Italian, right? So I'm sure we'd find a way to communicate. I submitted my request for 2 nights, and off I went, excited to experience Rome through the perspective of a local. And the first evening went beautifully. She greeted me with a warm smile, and to my surprise, had apparently invited everyone in her family for dinner, and together we enjoyed handmade pasta and sauces and Italian delicacies, and it was this beautiful experience of learning about Italian culture. Throughout the night, I caught bits and pieces of the conversation, and I nodded enthusiastically at all the right moments, and basically enjoyed a delightful evening before I retired to my guest room. And I woke up in the morning, excited for whatever future adventure we had planned, only to notice that she was packing up some luggage. And between breakfast gestures and scattered French words and my attempts to interpret the conversation, I pieced together something about the beach and her friend, and I was trying to figure out if her friend was coming to pick us up to go to the beach, but why she wanted me to take my luggage also. And finally, it dawned on me that she was leaving for a beach vacation with her friend, and that I would be dropped off at the Roman bus stops, because she understood I was only staying for 1 night, not 2. So mortified, I realized the misunderstanding, packed up my stuff, and realized that even if we hadn't misunderstood each other, she was leaving, so there was nowhere for me to stay anyways. So I hurriedly finished breakfast. We put all our luggage into her tiny Fiat, and we drove toward the bus station in downtown Rome. She gave me a warm hug, cheerfully told me how lovely it had been to meet. She hoped she'd see me again sometime, and sent me on my way as she waved and headed off to the coast. And a few moments later, I found myself sitting alone on a bus stop bench with my backpack and suitcase, wondering where exactly I was going to sleep that night. I pulled out my BlackBerry, you remember those, and I fired off some quick emails to my mom and to my then boyfriend. I said, okay, so everything's fine. There's just been a slight change of plans, but fortunately I have like 8 hours to find a hostel before it gets dark, so it'll be great. I added the smiley confidence to their benefit, but I wasn't quite buying it myself. As I looked around, another problem became painfully obvious. Every sign for the buses was in Italian. And despite sharing Latin roots, it looked far less like Spanish than I had confidently assumed. I approached a few people waiting near the buses, timidly asking in Spanish whether certain routes went toward the city center or out towards the outskirts of Rome. And most of them simply shrugged or responded that this isn't Spain, we don't speak Spanish here. And so I sank back onto the bench, and that's when the knot in my stomach began to form. And I thought, I might actually be in trouble here. I tried not to think about all my California friends who had joked about the movie Taken. Instead, I focused on what I could do next. Keep trying, find a hostel, figure it out. But underneath my determined exterior, another voice quietly emerged. How did I end up here? This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't the plan. Last night everything was going perfectly, and somehow today everything has unraveled. Have you ever found yourself asking some of those same questions? How did I end up here? Wait, my career was going so well, and suddenly now there are a bunch of layoffs? How did this happen? My health was fine just a few months ago, and then the test results came back, and now I have to change my entire lifestyle. How did I get here? Or I thought we had planned carefully for retirement, but between unexpected home repairs and rising costs, the budget's not looking quite like we had planned. How did everything unravel so quickly? Sometimes life changes in an instant, and we find ourselves standing in places we never expected to be, half confused about how we got there, and half wondering how we're going to get out. All the while grieving that this isn't how the life plan was supposed to go. What do we do in these moments when we find ourselves in moments of helplessness, embarrassed that maybe we need some help on this one? In the verses Tom read for us today, the word welcome appears over and over again. But in the biblical world, the word welcome is more like associated with receiving or accepting someone, to receive another person unto yourself, to graciously make room for them in your life. Embedded within the idea of welcome is an often unspoken power dynamic. We typically offer welcome to someone who arrives in a position of vulnerability when we are not. We welcome the weary traveler who has nowhere to rest, right? Or we welcome the stranger who doesn't know the language or the customs or the streets. We welcome the dinner guest who doesn't know where the bathroom is, or doesn't know where to put their coat, or how to get back to the parking garage after the evening's over. To welcome someone is to use whatever security or familiarity you possess to lessen another person's uncertainty. It's to make space for them, to help orient them, to ease their anxiety, and to communicate, you are safe here. You belong here. This is the heart of biblical hospitality. And hospitality is more than entertaining guests or setting a beautiful table. Shout out to Lillian, Eleanor, and Debbie if you've been to their houses. They know how to do this kind of hospitality, but they also know how to do the kind of hospitality where you feel like family. It's more than just the decor. It's feeling like you're one of us and you belong. Sometimes that space is physical. A bed or a meal or a place to sit. Your hands are full at potluck and you arrive to a table only to find that there's nowhere to sit, and Jerry Wahagege or Zach Abaro pulls a seat up for you and you breathe a sigh of relief because you can finally put your stuff down and join your friends. Sometimes the space is emotional. Offering a word of compassion to the mom whose kid is having a complete meltdown in aisle 8 by the Fruity Loops and getting the side eye from everyone else. And they just need that one look of, I get it, I understand. Sometimes it's social, making room for someone who feels excluded in the conversation. You notice them in the corner and you bring them in. And sometimes it's spiritual, reminding another person that they're seen and loved and received by God no matter who they are, which is what we try to do here in this church. In the world of Jesus, hospitality isn't just a social courtesy. It's actually an ethical responsibility. It was one of the primary ways that God's people disrupted the power imbalances that existed between insider and outsider, between host and stranger, between Jew and Gentile, between male and female. To welcome someone then is to leverage your own position of security for the sake of someone else's flourishing. And if that's what welcome really means, then where in the Bible do we see the greatest example of this? But in Jesus, right? Every Christmas, we celebrate when Jesus left the security and glory of heaven to become one of us and step into our world, into our vulnerability, and come so that we might know the welcome of God. Every Easter, we celebrate the fact that Jesus willingly gives up the security of life itself to enter into suffering and death, so that death no longer has a final word over us, so that we can flourish. And then Jesus' whole life in between, we see all these examples where he uses his position, his influence, and his power to welcome people that everyone else has overlooked. He makes time for children when the disciples try to send them away. He sits down with tax collectors, like we heard a couple weeks ago with Zacchaeus, who's quite surprised to find out that Jesus wants to take the time to sit down with him. He speaks with women who are often ignored. He touches lepers that no one else would come near, and he restores the dignity of prostitutes and widows and foreigners and those living on the margins. So over and over, Jesus chooses to use his place of security to step towards those living in uncertainty. And that's what welcome looks like. That's the model that we are given as Christ followers. Which brings us back to those moments of, how did I get here? We have these moments of complete and utter vulnerability and helplessness where we can't fix things on our own. And that's exactly where Jesus meets us. I don't know if you've ever had one of those moments where you're like, man, I really am at the end of my rope. I've tried everything, I've called everyone, and I really don't know what to do next. And to feel grace in those moments is one of the best feelings in the world. To be in a hospital bed, in the ER freezing, and to have a nurse come and bring you a warm blanket can feel like the biggest act of kindness in the world. To not have a place to stay one night and to have someone say, hey, I have a guest room, can feel like the biggest act of kindness in the world. Just for someone to hug you after a pet dies and to say, hey, I'm sorry, I know you loved that pet as part of the family, can just feel like the biggest moment of just kindness in the world. These are the moments that convert us, that actually bring us love, that actually bring us the grace of Christ, because that's what he does for us in our moments. And those are the moments that actually cause the conversion of the heart. To say, you know what, I have felt the grace of this way of life. I now want to do this for someone else, to participate in bringing this grace to someone else. Once we realize that God has pulled up a chair for us at his table, it's important for 3 reasons. Number 1, because we realize that we didn't seat ourselves at God's table. He sat us there. Our place at his table has always been a gift of grace. Number 2, if this was never our table to begin with, then we don't get to decide who else sits at the table. We can keep pulling up chairs and making room for others to experience the same grace that we've received. And number 3, it reminds us that hospitality isn't just a nice Christian virtue or good manners, but it's actually the heart of the gospel. The story of Scripture is the story of a God who continually moves toward vulnerable people, makes room for them, and welcomes them into abundant life. And if we claim to be Christ followers, then every day in our work and in our neighborhoods and in our churches, we're invited to live out that same story, to leverage whatever security or influence or blessings we have to give so that someone else can also flourish. As I sat at that bus stop in Rome with my luggage, trying to gather enough courage to work out my next step, I noticed a young woman across the street. She was sitting quietly on another bench, completely absorbed in a book as she was waiting for her bus. And at that point I figured, well, I've embarrassed myself enough, I have nothing left to lose. So I called across the street, "Hola, permiso, ¿acaso hablas español? Hi, excuse me, by chance, do you speak Spanish?" She looked up from her book, smiled, and replied, "Sí, hablo español, yo soy de Venezuela. Yes, I speak Spanish, I'm from Venezuela." Thank God. I don't think I've ever felt such immediate relief. I grabbed my backpack and suitcase, ran across the street. Before long, every detail of my predicament came tumbling out at her, and she just smiled at me, and she said, "Okay, we're going to work it out." Turns out she was a history student at La Sapienza University, and she had the day off. They were on break. And she said, "Do you want me to show you around Rome? I can show you all the big landmarks." I said, oh, okay, sure. And so we spent a day going around Rome with my personal tour guide and a new friend, looking at all these landmarks and understanding the history and sharing the stories behind them from the eyes of someone who loved them. And as evening approached, she mentioned that she lived with her aunt, who happened to be a politician in Rome. And she said, we have an extra guest room if you want to stay with us. I said, yes, please. Can I? And just like that, a chair had been pulled up for me at the table. The next morning, after homemade crepes and an introduction to Laura Pausini, who I had never heard of, much to her incredulity, my new friend hugged me goodbye and she sent me on my way, and I gained much more than just a friend. I had this moment where God met me through the welcome of a stranger. Someone with security had made room for someone who was vulnerable. Someone with a home had shared it with someone who didn't have one. And someone with familiarity had shared it with someone who was completely lost. And isn't that the gospel? Long before we ever found our way to God, God makes room for us. He pulls up a chair. He welcomes us. And now, by His grace, may we have the joy of doing the same for someone else.